when I refused my mom's demand for my inheritance. She called a family meeting, and what I walked into changed everything. My name is Sienna Walsh. I'm 26, and 8 months ago my grandmother left me an inheritance worth $900,000. My mother, who had spent years putting her own needs before mine, suddenly decided she deserved half of what Grandma Rose had left me. When I refused to hand over nearly $500,000 to fund her latest business venture, she invited me to what she called a family discussion. Instead, I walked into an ambush with a lawyer ready to convince me I had no choice. But when they pushed those papers toward me, I smiled and said something that turned their whole plan upside down. Before I tell you what happened next, let me know where you're watching from, and subscribe if you've ever had to choose between family harmony and protecting what's rightfully yours. Growing up in Sacramento wasn't the fairy tale childhood most kids dream of. My parents divorced when I was 7, and my mother, Linda, immediately began treating me more like a roommate than a daughter. She worked irregular hours as a bartender, often leaving me to fend for myself while she pursued what she called networking opportunities, which usually meant dates with customers who promised to help her latest get-rich-quick scheme. My father moved to Denver after the divorce, sending child support checks but rarely calling. The few times he did visit, he seemed uncomfortable, like he was checking off a parental obligation rather than wanting to spend time with me. It was my grandmother Rose who became my anchor in the chaos. Grandma Rose lived just 15 minutes away in a charming Victorian house she'd inherited from her own mother. The wraparound porch was lined with flower boxes she tended religiously, and the interior smelled like vanilla candles and fresh-baked cookies. When my mother's networking ran late, which happened at least 3 nights a week, I'd walk to Grandma's house after school. "Education is the one thing no one can take from you," she'd tell me as we sat at her kitchen table, me working on homework while she prepared dinner. Grandma Rose had worked as a librarian for 40 years, never marrying or having children until she adopted my father in her 30s. She understood the value of stability and routine in ways my mother never did. Our weekend traditions were sacred. Saturday mornings meant the farmer's market, where Grandma Rose knew every vendor by name and taught me to select the ripest fruits and freshest vegetables. Saturday afternoons were for cooking together, learning family recipes she'd collected over decades. Sunday mornings we attended church, followed by long walks through McKinley Park, where she'd point out different bird species and tell stories about her childhood. "Your mother means well," she'd say diplomatically when I complained about Linda's latest absence or broken promise. "But some people are dreamers who never learned to build foundations under their dreams. That's why it's important for you to be practical, Sienna. Dreams are beautiful, but you need solid ground to stand on while you reach for them." Meanwhile, my mother cycled through various schemes with the enthusiasm of someone who believed the next idea would finally be her big break. She tried selling makeup, jewelry, and kitchen gadgets through multi-level marketing companies. She invested our grocery money in penny stocks based on tips from bar customers. She even briefly attempted to become a social media influencer, spending money we didn't have on ring lights and camera equipment. Each failure was followed by a period of depression where she'd retreat to her bedroom, emerging only to blame external circumstances for her lack of success. During these times, I'd spend even more time at Grandma's house, where consistency and warmth never wavered. When I turned 16, Grandma Rose sat me down for a serious conversation about my future. "I want you to know I've been setting aside money for your college education," she said, showing me a savings account statement with my name on it. "Your mother doesn't know about this, and I'd prefer to keep it that way for now. This money is specifically for your education and your future, nothing else." I was overwhelmed by her generosity and foresight. My mother had never mentioned college savings, and I'd assumed I'd have to figure out higher education financing on my own. Knowing Grandma Rose was looking out for my future made me even more determined to succeed academically. High school was challenging, not because of the coursework, but because of the instability at home. My mother's schemes became more elaborate and expensive, often requiring investments that left us short on basic necessities. I learned to shop for groceries strategically, stretching every dollar and meal planning to ensure we had food for the week. During my senior year, my mother announced she was starting a catering business with a friend she'd met at the bar. They needed startup capital, she explained, and wondered if I had any money saved from my part-time job at the local bookstore. I told her I was saving for college, which prompted a lecture about family loyalty and helping each other succeed. If this business takes off, we'll all benefit, she argued. I could pay for your college and more. Sometimes you have to invest in family dreams. I politely declined, not mentioning Grandma Rose's college fund. Something about my mother's tone made me wary of revealing that financial safety net. The catering business lasted 6 months before dissolving in a mess of unpaid invoices and partner disputes. College at UC Davis was my escape and my salvation. Studying business administration, I finally felt like I was building the foundation Grandma Rose had always talked about. I lived in the dorms, worked part-time in the campus library, and visited Grandma every few weeks. She'd send care packages filled with homemade cookies and encouraging notes, always asking about my classes and future plans. My mother's contact was sporadic during college. She'd call when she needed advice on a business idea, help understanding paperwork, or occasionally money for what she called temporary cash flow issues. I helped when I could, but I was careful not to jeopardize my own financial stability or academic progress. After graduation, I accepted a position as a junior accountant at a respected firm in Sacramento, partly to stay close to Grandma Rose, who was showing signs of slowing down. At 78, she still maintained her house and garden, but I noticed she moved more carefully and tired more easily during our weekend activities. "I'm not getting any younger," she admitted during one of our Sunday walks. "I need to make sure all my affairs are in order. I've updated my will recently, and I want you to know what to expect when I'm gone." She explained that she was leaving her house and the bulk of her savings to me, with smaller amounts designated for a few charities she'd supported over the years. "Your mother will receive something, of course, but not the major portion. I love her dearly, but Linda has never learned to manage money responsibly. Giving her a large sum would be like pouring water into a bucket with holes in the bottom." I protested that she shouldn't worry about such things, that she had years ahead of her, but she smiled and patted my hand. "Practical planning, remember? I want to have these conversations while I'm healthy and clear-minded, so there are no surprises or confusion later." 2 years later, those conversations proved prophetic. Grandma Rose suffered a stroke while tending her garden on a beautiful spring morning. I found her when I arrived for our usual Saturday farmers market trip. She was conscious, but unable to speak clearly, and the paramedics said we'd caught it early enough that recovery was possible with proper care. I took family leave from work to coordinate her medical care and rehabilitation. She made significant progress over the following months, regaining most of her speech and mobility, but she never quite returned to her former energy level. I helped her arrange for a part-time caregiver and made sure she had everything she needed while maintaining her independence. My mother visited occasionally during this period, always seeming uncomfortable in the hospital or rehabilitation facility. She'd stay for short periods, making awkward conversation before finding excuses to leave. When I suggested she might spend more time with Grandma, she became defensive. "I don't know what to say to her in that condition," Linda complained. "It's depressing, and you know I'm not good with medical stuff. Besides, you're handling everything so well." Grandma Rose lived another year after her stroke, spending her final months in the house she loved, surrounded by her books and garden. I visited every day after work, and we'd sit on the porch watching the sunset, talking about everything and nothing. She died peacefully in her sleep on a Tuesday night in March. The funeral drew a surprising crowd. Former library colleagues, neighbors, church members, and volunteers from her various charitable activities came to pay their respects. Person after person approached me with stories about how Grandma Rose had helped them with research projects, family genealogy, reading recommendations, or simply by being a kind listener during difficult times. My mother arrived late, dressed in an outfit more suitable for a cocktail party than a funeral. She seemed surprised by the turnout and spent most of her time asking questions about the inheritance rather than participating in the remembrance of Grandma's life. The will reading took place the following week in Mr. Patterson's law office. He'd been Grandma Rose's attorney and friend for over 20 years, and his gentle demeanor reflected the sadness we all felt at her passing. Rose was very specific about her intentions, he began, adjusting his reading glasses. She wanted to ensure her legacy would be preserved and put to good use. The bequests were exactly as Grandma had described to me. The house, valued at approximately $400,000, came to me, along with $500,000 in investments and savings. She'd left $25,000 to the local library foundation, $25,000 to her church, and $50,000 to my mother. My mother's reaction was immediate and explosive. "This can't be right," she declared, her voice rising. "Mother wouldn't leave me so little while giving Sienna everything. There must be a mistake." Mr. Patterson remained calm and professional. "I assure you, Mrs. Walsh, these were your mother's explicit wishes. She discussed them with me at length and was very clear about her reasoning." "What reasoning?" my mother demanded. "I'm her daughter. I should inherit equally." "Your mother was concerned about financial responsibility," Mr. Patterson explained diplomatically. "She felt that Sienna had demonstrated the judgment necessary to preserve and grow the inheritance." My mother stormed out before Mr. Patterson finished reading the personal letters Grandma had left for each of us. Mine, written in her familiar handwriting, explained her decision in more detail. "My dearest Sienna," it began, "by the time you read this, I'll be gone. But I want you to understand why I've made these choices. Over the years, I've watched you grow into a responsible, caring young woman who values education, hard work, and helping others. You've never asked me for money or expected handouts, even when I knew you were struggling. Your mother, bless her heart, has a different relationship with money and responsibility. I've bailed her out of financial troubles more times than I can count, and each time she promised it was the last time. But there was always another scheme, another crisis, another emergency. I realized that giving her large sums of money wasn't helping her learn fiscal responsibility, it was enabling her to avoid it. Use this inheritance wisely, sweetheart. Invest in your future, help others when you can, and don't let anyone pressure you into decisions that don't feel right. You have excellent judgment, and I trust you completely." Reading those words brought tears to my eyes, but also a sense of profound responsibility. Grandma Rose had trusted me with her life savings, and I was determined to honor that trust. The first few weeks after the funeral were relatively quiet. I hired a property management company to handle potential renters for Grandma's house, while I decided whether to sell or keep it. I met with a financial advisor to discuss investment strategies for the inheritance money. I also increased my charitable giving, knowing Grandma would approve of sharing our good fortune. My mother's first approach came about a month after the will reading. She called, ostensibly to check on how I was handling my grief, but the conversation quickly shifted to the inheritance. "I've been thinking about Mom's decision," she said, her tone carefully casual. Obviously, she wasn't thinking clearly toward the end. The stroke probably affected her judgment more than we realized. I disagreed, pointing out that Grandma had updated her will 2 years before her stroke, when she was in perfect health. "Well, regardless," my mother continued, "I think we should discuss sharing the inheritance more fairly. I am her daughter after all." And $50,000 doesn't go very far these days. I asked what she had in mind, though I suspected where the conversation was heading. I was thinking maybe a 50-50 split would be more appropriate, she said, or at least 70-30. I have this amazing business opportunity right now. A friend wants to open a boutique fitness studio, and she needs an investor. With my share of the inheritance, I could be her business partner. I declined politely but firmly, explaining that I intended to honor Grandma's wishes exactly as she'd written them. My mother's disappointment was palpable, but she ended the call without pushing further. The second approach came 2 weeks later, this time with emotional manipulation. She showed up at my apartment unannounced, tears streaming down her face. "I'm in trouble, Sienna," she sobbed, explaining that she'd borrowed money from someone named Marcus to invest in cryptocurrency, and the investment had gone bad. "He's threatening me if I don't pay him back by next month. I need $200,000 just temporarily. I'll pay you back with interest once I get back on my feet." I offered to help her find credit counseling or speak to Mr. Patterson about legal options for dealing with creditors, but I wouldn't give her money for what sounded like a gambling debt. She left angry, accusing me of being selfish and forgetting where I came from. The harassment escalated over the following month. She'd call at all hours, sometimes crying, sometimes angry, always with new reasons why I should share the inheritance. She told family members I was being unreasonable, painting herself as a victim of Grandma's favoritism and my greed. She enlisted my cousin Derek, her nephew, to call and suggest that family harmony was more important than money. She had my Aunt Barbara, her sister, send a text about how disappointed Grandma would be to see us fighting over her legacy. The breaking point came when I discovered she'd somehow obtained my work address and showed up at my office, creating a scene in the lobby that my boss, Mr. Rodriguez, had to help resolve. "I need to ask that your personal matters don't disrupt the workplace again," he told me privately afterward. "I understand family can be complicated, but we can't have clients witnessing dramatic confrontations in our lobby." I was mortified and apologetic, assuring him it wouldn't happen again. That evening, I called Mr. Patterson to discuss my legal options. "Unfortunately, family pressure regarding inheritances is more common than you'd think," he told me. "Your grandmother anticipated this possibility, which is why she was so specific in her will. You have no legal obligation to share beyond what she designated." "But what if she contests the will?" I asked. "She could try, but it would be expensive and unlikely to succeed. Your grandmother was demonstrably competent when she made these decisions, and I have extensive documentation of her reasoning. Still, we should be prepared for that possibility." A few days later, my mother called with what sounded like a more reasonable proposal. "I've been thinking about our situation," she said, her tone calmer than it had been in weeks. "Maybe we've both been too emotional about this. What if we sit down as a family and discuss everything rationally? I've asked Aunt Barbara to host a family dinner this Sunday, just close family, so we can talk through everything openly." Something about her tone made me wary, but part of me hoped for genuine reconciliation. Despite everything, she was still my mother, and I'd grown tired of the constant conflict. "Just family," I confirmed. "No one else?" "Just family," she assured me. "Barbara's making her famous pot roast, and we can have an honest conversation about what Mom would have wanted." I agreed to attend, though I decided to take precautions. I told my friend Jessica about the dinner and asked her to call me if she didn't hear from me by 9 p.m. I also brought a small digital recorder, slipping it into my purse before leaving my apartment. Aunt Barbara lived in a modest ranch house about 20 minutes from my apartment. As I pulled into her driveway, I noticed several unfamiliar cars parked on the street. My mother's silver sedan was there, along with Derek's pickup truck, but the black BMW and white Mercedes were unknown to me. This didn't feel like just family anymore. I sat in my car for a few moments considering leaving, but Grandma Rose's voice seemed to echo in my mind. Sometimes you have to face difficult situations head-on, sweetheart. Running away just gives other people more power over your choices. Taking a deep breath, I gathered my courage and walked to the front door. The moment I stepped into Aunt Barbara's living room, the conversation stopped abruptly. 7 pairs of eyes turned toward me, and the silence felt oppressive. My mother sat on the sofa beside 2 people I didn't recognize, a middle-aged man in an expensive suit and a woman with silver hair and sharp eyes, both holding leather portfolios. Derek lounged in the recliner, avoiding eye contact, while Aunt Barbara hovered nervously by the kitchen entrance. Uncle Tom, Barbara's husband, stood by the fireplace looking deeply uncomfortable. "Sienna, you made it!" my mother exclaimed, her smile too bright and not reaching her eyes. "I'd like you to meet some friends who've been helping me sort through the legal aspects of Mom's estate. This is Mr. Davidson and Miss Torres. They're attorneys who specialize in estate planning." Mr. Davidson stood, extending a manicured hand. "Miss Walsh, your mother has told us so much about you. We're here to help resolve what seems to be a complex family situation." I shook his hand warily, noting how Miss Torres was already removing documents from her portfolio. This was definitely not the family dinner I'd been promised. "I thought this was supposed to be just family," I said, looking directly at my mother. "Well, they're practically family at this point," she replied with a nervous laugh. "They've been so helpful with understanding our legal options." Aunt Barbara appeared at my elbow, her hug slightly too tight. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "This isn't what Linda told me it would be." We were ushered to the dining room, where Barbara's good china was set for 7 people. I found myself seated between Derek and Mr. Davidson, directly across from my mother and Miss Torres. The pot roast smelled delicious, but my appetite had vanished. Conversation during dinner was stilted and artificial. Mr. Davidson asked about my work, Miss Torres complimented Barbara's cooking, and everyone carefully avoided mentioning the inheritance or Grandma Rose. It felt like we were all actors in a play, reading lines while waiting for the real drama to begin. After Barbara cleared the dessert plates, my mother set down her napkin with theatrical finality. "Well, I think it's time we discussed why we're all here." Miss Torres opened her portfolio and withdrew several official-looking documents. "Sienna, we've prepared some paperwork that we think will resolve the issues surrounding your grandmother's estate distribution." Mr. Davidson leaned forward earnestly. "What we're proposing is a voluntary redistribution that better reflects your grandmother's intentions if she'd had all the relevant information." "What relevant information?" I asked, though I suspected this was leading toward claims that Grandma hadn't understood my mother's financial situation. "Your mother has shared some concerns about the original will," Miss Torres explained smoothly. "Specifically, she believes your grandmother wasn't fully aware of your mother's current circumstances and future potential." My mother nodded sadly. "Mom always saw my past mistakes instead of my growth. She didn't understand that I've learned from my experiences and I'm ready to make better choices." Mr. Davidson slid the documents across the table. "These papers establish a more equitable distribution, 60% to you, 40% to your mother. It recognizes your grandmother's desire to prioritize your future while ensuring your mother receives fair consideration as the biological daughter." I glanced at the first page, noting the official letterhead and dense legal language. Despite the complicated wording, the intent was clear. I would voluntarily transfer approximately $360,000 to my mother. "This seems very generous to Sienna," Miss Torres added with a practiced smile. "Most families would split inherited assets equally between children and grandchildren." Derek finally spoke up from beside me. "It makes sense, Sienna. Families should stick together, and this way, everyone's happy." I noticed Uncle Tom had disappeared, probably to avoid participating in what was clearly an ambush. Aunt Barbara remained in the kitchen, dishes clattering unusually loudly as she avoided the conversation. "I need time to review this," I said, setting the papers aside. "This is a significant decision." "Of course," Mr. Davidson said, though his tone suggested otherwise. "However, we should mention that waiting too long could complicate things. There are tax implications and other legal considerations that make prompt action advisable." My mother's facade was beginning to crack. "Sienna, this is fair. It's what Mom would have wanted if she'd really understood the situation." "Actually," I said calmly, reaching into my purse, "I think Grandma Rose understood the situation perfectly." I withdrew the personal letter she'd left me, the one my mother had stormed out before hearing. "Would you like me to read what she wrote about her decision?" The room fell silent except for the sound of my mother's sharp intake of breath. "She wrote about your financial history, Mom. About the multiple bailouts, the failed business ventures, the money that was lent and never repaid. She was very specific about why she made the choices she did." I unfolded the letter, though I'd memorized the relevant passages. "I've bailed her out of financial troubles more times than I can count, and each time she promised it was the last time. But there was always another scheme, another crisis, another emergency." My mother's face was flushing red. "She had no right to put those things in writing." "She had every right," I replied firmly. "It was her money and her decision. And there's more." I reached back into my purse and withdrew another document. "This is a letter Mr. Patterson gave me last week, written by Grandma Rose specifically in case someone tried to pressure me into changing her distribution." This was a slight exaggeration. Mr. Patterson had given me copies of all documents related to the estate, but the effect was immediate. Mr. Davidson and Miss Torres exchanged glances, their professional confidence wavering. "In this letter," I continued, "Grandma Rose explicitly states that any attempt to coerce me into redistributing the inheritance differently should be considered contrary to her wishes and potentially grounds for legal action." This was completely fabricated, but my mother's lawyers didn't know that, and their uncomfortable shifting suggested they were reassessing their position. "Furthermore," I said, my voice growing stronger, "I should probably mention that I've been recording this conversation since I arrived." I placed my small digital recorder on the table, its red light blinking steadily. Oregon is a one-party consent state for audio recording, which means I don't need anyone's permission to record conversations I'm part of. Derek pushed back from the table. "You recorded us without telling us?" "I recorded a conversation I was participating in, which is completely legal," I corrected. "Given that I was invited to what was supposed to be a family dinner but instead found attorneys with paperwork ready for me to sign, I think recording was a reasonable precaution." Mr. Davidson was already packing his documents back into his portfolio. "Miss Walsh, I think there may have been some miscommunication about the nature of tonight's meeting." "There was no miscommunication," I said firmly. "There was deception. I was told this would be a family dinner to discuss things rationally. Instead, I find lawyers with papers designed to pressure me into giving away money that my grandmother specifically intended for me." Miss Torres stood, her professional demeanor intact but clearly ready to leave. "If you decide you'd like legal representation to discuss redistribution options, you're welcome to contact our office." "I already have legal representation," I replied. "Mr. Patterson has been our family attorney for over 20 years, and he's very familiar with my grandmother's intentions." As the lawyers made their hasty exit, my mother's composure finally cracked completely. "You ungrateful little bitch," she snarled, her mask of wounded motherhood falling away entirely. "I gave you life. I raised you. And this is how you repay me?" "You didn't raise me," I said quietly. "Grandma Rose raised me. You were too busy with your schemes and your boyfriends to be a real parent." Derek stood uncomfortably. "Maybe I should go too." "Yes, maybe you should," I agreed, standing as well. "And Derek? Next time someone asks you to help pressure a family member into giving away their inheritance, think about whether that's really the kind of person you want to be." He left without another word, leaving just my mother, Aunt Barbara, who had reappeared from the kitchen, And me. Aunt Barbara, I said, turning to her. I'm sorry this happened in your home. I don't think you knew what Mom was planning. She nodded, tears in her eyes. I didn't, sweetheart. She told me it was just a family dinner to clear the air. I'm so sorry. My mother was pacing now, her anger uncontained. This isn't over, Sienna. I'll contest the will. I'll prove Mom wasn't competent when she made it. You're welcome to try, I said calmly, gathering my purse and the recorder. But Mr. Patterson documented all of Grandma's decisions extensively, including video recordings of her explaining her reasoning. She was demonstrably competent, and she anticipated exactly this scenario. I walked toward the door, pausing with my hand on the knob. Mom, I would have helped you if you'd approached me honestly. If you'd come to me with a reasonable request for help, with a genuine emergency, we could have worked something out. Instead, you tried to manipulate me, pressure me, and ultimately ambush me with lawyers. She was crying now, but they seemed like tears of frustration rather than genuine sorrow. I'm your mother. I deserve better than this. You're right, I said sadly. You do deserve better. You deserve to have learned financial responsibility, to have built genuine relationships based on trust instead of manipulation, and to have been the kind of mother who could approach her daughter honestly instead of setting traps. The night air felt cleansing as I stepped outside, leaving behind the toxic atmosphere of manipulation and false family loyalty. I sat in my car for several minutes, letting the adrenaline fade and the reality of what had just happened sink in. I'd stood up to my mother, her lawyers, and the entire family pressure campaign. I'd protected what Grandma Rose had entrusted to me, and I'd done it without cruelty or vindictiveness. The strength I'd discovered within myself felt both surprising and familiar, like remembering how to use muscles I'd forgotten I had. The phone rang as I was driving home. Jessica's name appeared on the display. Are you okay? She asked immediately. It's past 9 and I was starting to worry. I'm okay, I said, and for the first time in months, I really meant it. Actually, I'm better than okay. I'm free. Over coffee the next morning, I told Jessica the entire story. Her reaction was a mixture of outrage at my mother's behavior and pride in how I'd handled the situation. I can't believe she brought lawyers to ambush you, she said, shaking her head. That's not family pressure, that's predatory behavior. The worst part is that I actually hoped for genuine reconciliation, I admitted. Some part of me still wanted to believe she could be the mother I'd always needed. That hope doesn't make you naive, Jessica assured me. It makes you human. But now you know exactly who she is, and you can make informed decisions about how much of your life you want to share with her. I spent the following week consulting with Mr. Patterson about the incident and my options going forward. He was unsurprised by my mother's tactics, but impressed by how I'd handled the situation. Your grandmother would be very proud, he told me. She knew this might happen, and she trusted you to protect yourself and her legacy. You've done exactly that. What happens now? I asked. Now you live your life according to your values, not your mother's demands, he said simply. You honor your grandmother's trust by using her gift wisely and refusing to let anyone manipulate you into poor decisions. I also made an appointment with a therapist, Dr. Martinez, to help process the complex emotions surrounding my relationship with my mother and the guilt I felt about maintaining boundaries. Healthy relationships require mutual respect and honest communication, she explained during our first session. What you've described isn't a relationship problem. It's a pattern of financial and emotional abuse that you've learned to recognize and resist. Over the following months, I focused on building a life that honored both Grandma Rose's memory and my own values. I kept her house as a rental property, generating steady income while preserving a piece of family history. I invested the majority of the inheritance conservatively, ensuring long-term financial security while setting aside funds for charitable giving and future opportunities. I also established a small scholarship fund at the local community college, specifically for adult students returning to education after setbacks, people who reminded me of what my mother could have been if she'd chosen responsibility over quick fixes. My mother made several more attempts at contact over the year following the ambush dinner. She sent emails alternating between apologies and accusations, left voicemails that ranged from tearful to threatening, and even had Derek try to mediate on her behalf. Each attempt followed the same pattern: initial emotional manipulation, escalation to demands and threats, and finally withdrawal when I didn't respond the way she wanted. I documented everything, as Mr. Patterson had advised, but I didn't engage. The final attempt came on the anniversary of Grandma Rose's death. My mother showed up at the cemetery while I was visiting the grave, approaching carefully as if testing whether I'd flee or confront her. "I've been thinking about Mom a lot today," she said, standing several feet away from where I knelt beside the headstone. "About what she'd want for us." I finished arranging the fresh flowers I'd brought, daffodils, Grandma's favorites, before responding. "She'd want me to be happy and financially secure, which I am. She'd want you to learn from your mistakes and build a stable life, which you haven't." "I'm trying," my mother said, her voice smaller than I'd heard it in years. "I got a job at a hotel, front desk work. It's not glamorous, but it's steady income." This was the first time I'd heard her mention stable employment in years. "That's good, Mom. I hope you stick with it. I miss her," she said, looking at the headstone. "I know you think I didn't care about her, but I did. I never knew how to show it the way you did." "Caring isn't just about feelings," I replied, standing and brushing dirt from my knees. "It's about actions, choices, consistency. Grandma Rose knew you had feelings for her, but she needed to see those feelings translated into responsible behavior." My mother was quiet for several minutes, perhaps finally understanding the distinction. When she spoke again, her voice was barely audible. "I'm sorry for what I put you through. The lawyers, the pressure, all of it. You were right. If I'd come to you honestly, maybe things could have been different." It was the first genuine apology I'd ever heard from her, and it carried more weight than any of her previous dramatic declarations. "Maybe they could have been," I agreed. "But that would have required you to be honest with yourself first, and I don't think you were ready for that." "Am I ready now?" she asked, and for once, it sounded like a genuine question rather than manipulation. "I don't know, Mom. That's something only you can answer through your actions over time, not your words in a moment." She nodded, seeming to understand that trust, once broken so thoroughly, couldn't be rebuilt with a single conversation. "I should go," she said. "I just wanted you to know that I'm trying to do better. Not because I want anything from you, but because Mom deserved better from me, and so did you." As she walked away, I felt a complex mixture of sadness, relief, and something that might have been the beginning of peace. Our relationship might never be what I'd once hoped for, but perhaps it could evolve into something honest, even if distant. Standing beside Grandma Rose's grave, I felt her presence strongly. The inheritance she'd left me wasn't just money and property. It was the gift of learning to trust my own judgment, stand up for my values, and refuse to be manipulated by people who claimed to love me while trying to use me. A year and a half after that confrontation at Aunt Barbara's house, I stood in my own home, a modest but beautiful craftsman-style house I'd purchased with part of the inheritance, preparing dinner for friends who had become my chosen family. Jessica was there, along with my boyfriend Mark, a teacher I'd met through volunteer work, and several colleagues who had evolved from professional relationships into genuine friendships. We were celebrating the first anniversary of the scholarship fund, which had already helped 12 students return to school. The thank you letters from recipients sat on my mantelpiece, reminders that Grandma Rose's legacy was continuing to change lives in exactly the way she would have wanted. My mother and I had maintained minimal but civil contact. She'd kept the hotel job for over a year, and her emails had evolved from demands and drama to brief updates about her life. We were nowhere near a close relationship, but we'd achieved something like peaceful coexistence. More importantly, I'd learned that protecting myself from manipulation wasn't selfish or cruel. It was necessary for building the kind of life Grandma Rose had wanted for me. The inheritance had given me financial security, but the experience of defending it had given me something more valuable, the knowledge that I was strong enough to stand up for myself and wise enough to honor the trust of someone who had truly loved me. As I looked around my dining room, filled with people who cared about me without expecting anything in return, I heard Grandma Rose's voice one more time. "You built your foundation, sweetheart. Now you can reach for any dream you want." The inheritance had been more than money. It had been a lesson in self-worth, a test of character, and ultimately, the foundation for a life built on my own terms rather than someone else's manipulation. That night, as I cleaned up after dinner and prepared for bed, I opened the jewelry box that had belonged to Grandma Rose. Inside, along with her modest collection of pearls and simple gold pieces, was a note I'd discovered months after her passing. Written in her careful handwriting, it simply said, "For Sienna, who always knew the difference between love and obligation. Use this gift to build the life you deserve, not the one others expect of you." I smiled, touching the small locket that had been her mother's, and whispered, "Thank you, Grandma. I finally understand what you were trying to teach me all along."